Good afternoon. Welcome to Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited, the home of vehicle restoration in Retford, weirdly, which is in Basildon, but there you go. We're on a Doncaster postcode, so we stick with Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited. What I thought I'd do today is talk you through a little bit. The season is coming back, okay? We're now in the sort of middle of February. The show season is going to be starting in March, April time. Easter this year is March, so it's an early Easter, and that's usually when the show season starts. So what I thought I'd talk you through is a few of the little jobs you want to be doing in no particular order at all to your car before you start using it. It's been off the road over winter. I'm sure nobody's been using them very much, if at all. Okay, so here's a little checklist of things I would check, or I would certainly do before it starts, okay? Number one, before you push it out, before you take the cover off, before you run her up, tyres, okay? Has it sat on the tyres? Have they moved? Are they flat and are they still legal? Are they in date? And have they still got tread on them? They won't have worn out over the winter months. I know that for a fact. But if you haven't been using your car, please check that they are pumped up and tight. The old classic here is the old wheel nuts, okay? Somebody decides to do a little tiny, teeny job over the winter, and of course you're not a garage like me, so you don't have to turn them around quickly for customers. So you whip the wheels off to check the brakes, change the brakes, have a look at the brakes. You bob the wheels back on, you nip the wheel nuts up and put it on the floor, like those are, and then you forget to tighten them. So the first job here is check your wheels and tyres. Okay, check the tyres are inflated, check they have not got cracks, damage, holes, and check they are to the right pressure, followed by a nice big check-in of just nipping around and torquing up the wheel nuts, or just giving them a good tighten just to make sure they're tight. Don't assume because one is tight, they are all tight. For the 5 minutes it saves you, it could save your life. Check number two. Still pointing at the wheel, check the brakes, okay? Take the car out of gear, just rock it forward and backwards a little bit, just to make sure the brakes haven't seized on. Now, if they have, it's just because they've stood, maybe there's a little moisture in the drums or the discs, and the brakes have stuck a little bit. Now then, 9 times out of 10, they will free off as soon as you use the vehicle. However, things like the handbrake will often stick because of lack of use. There's nothing particularly wrong in there, but it may be worth just whipping those rear drums off and checking everything's moving and free. Again, this takes me back to a previous video I did about lack of use. Just check that everything is right in your brakes. Check there's nothing leaking. Check there's no puddles under your car of brake fluid. If you've got rubber hoses, this one has stainless hoses, but if you've got rubber hoses, they may have perished and split. They might have had my seat in them for all you know. Okay, not necessarily, but it's all a possibility. Check you haven't got lining tape around your brakes. Lol. If the brakes stick on a little bit, just ensure that they work, okay? Rock the car forward under power maybe, and just test the brakes. Make sure they go on and make sure they go off. When you take the car out for that first run, make sure the brakes are working. Don't set off, get to the end of the road, realize you're doing 60 miles an hour, and then find out they're not working. Things are going to end really badly. So just make sure everything's right. If it isn't, have a look at them. If not, have a specialist look at them. Check the brake fluid. We know brake fluid is hydroscopic. Certainly is here in the UK, okay? So please, please, please check that that hasn't got brown and fungus, because if it has, you need to change it. And lack of use is the worst thing for these things. Number three. This one is a double hitter, okay? Oil. Now, everybody's going to say, of course it'll have oil in it. Not necessarily, okay? And oil is a big issue when you come to starting your car up after a stagnant amount of time. So if you haven't been running your car up, as I recommend a little bit here and there, this can be a biggish issue. There's a number of issues around your oil system, and bear in mind your oil system is the lifeblood of your engine. The first one is If it's not been used at all, it could have condensation in it, okay? Which means you've got water in your oil. It could be a tiny drip, which isn't a big concern. It could be quite a lot of condensation in your oil. Depending on the temperature and the ambient weather and all that sort of stuff, you can get moisture in your oil. If you've any doubt, if there's any emulsification in there, check under the filler cap. There'll also always be a tiny bit of emulsification under there, but there shouldn't be huge whopping amounts. The rocker covers shouldn't be full of it, okay? Secondly, check you've got oil in it. Like your tyres and like your wheel nuts, people will quite often drop the oil to change the oil and completely forget about it, okay? Check that your oil filter is fitted and tight, and then put some fresh oil in if there isn't any in there. If there is oil in there, all good. If none, you need some, definitely. This draws me on to the next thing. Now, I used to have a Mini, and I know I have Rover V8s with the conventional oil pump, okay? And they used to have a huge, especially the Mini, actually. The Mini turbo engine I had in my Mini pickup had a huge propensity for the oil pressure relief valve sticking. So, you would start the car up, the oil pressure would come up lovely, up to 50 sort of PSI, whatever. You'd start off down the road, it'd go up to about 8 PSI, and that was it, 0, back to nothing, no oil pressure, the oil light would come on, and you were in a world of pain. And it used to take a little tiny teeny mallet, not a hammer, or a tiny little ball peen hammer, maybe just gently on where the oil pressure relief valve is, to free it back off again. I don't know why it did it. All I know is it did it. The same thing happened to me Capri. I had the conventional Rover V8 in, okay, with the front cover from an SD1. Went out for the first run after I sprayed it orange all those years ago. There it is in the picture. Had a passenger in who thought the car was hysterical, stopped, did a big rolling burnout in it, and then the oil light came on and it really stopped. The oil pressure relief valve had stuck wide open and there was no oil pressure at all. About 2 PSI maybe, but certainly not enough to run an engine. I managed to stop, get out, ask a gentleman who lived at the side of the road, he was in, thank goodness, if I could borrow a hammer and tap the end of the oil pressure relief valve housing. The oil pressure relief valve clicked, I heard it, and from that point, it was fine again. And yes, that was a non-stick valve before anybody comments on it. But it still used to stick occasionally. Whether I put extra washers in the spring to strengthen it or whether I left it as it was. So check you've got oil pressure and you can maintain that oil pressure. Electrics, okay? Here's the battery. I store my cars with the battery disconnected. Regardless of how confident I am about the electrics, I rebuilt this loom, I know it's all good. However, and I have tested it, however, I will tell you that I leave the battery disconnected for various reasons. The main one is so the battery doesn't go flat. The second one is so that if anything happens, and I do mean anything, there isn't going to be a fire. So the first thing to do is, if you haven't done it already, check your poles are clean on your battery. A little wire brush, a little emery cloth, something like that. Check the inside of the clamp is clean also, okay? So this part in here, excuse me a sec while I put that down. Sorry, trying to hold the gimbal as well. So this part where my finger is in there, I just whiten that round, a little bit of anything abrasive. It doesn't have to be very abrasive. You're not trying to grind it away. And then tighten the clamp securely. Now this one, it's a stag, so you have to be careful of the stand here because this is obviously the live wire. However, make sure your battery clamps are clean and tight. Then check your electrics through. Obviously, I'm lucky in here. I did have a mouse in here a few weeks ago, and I've managed to dispatch that poor little so-and-so now. Don't like killing them, but when you're in the countryside, eventually they're going to come in. Classic cars, not as bad as modern cars because they don't have the hive of wiring, but if you get a mouse or a rat in there, it's going to think your wiring is like Christmas. They love to nestle in it. And of course, if they like that in there at Christmas time, they're going to munch away at that insulation until it's out the way. Rabbits do it, mice do it. I don't have a rabbit infestation, but I used to have a pet one. So make sure nothing goes bang. If there's a fuse blown, check why it's blown, okay? Check your electrics, make sure everything is working. Doesn't matter how new or old your classic is, just ensure that you haven't had something living up the back of that dashboard chewing. Now this car, I left this part off, Okay, so this has the light switch in here, which of course has a permanent live in it. Live switches on classic cars, particularly British cars, don't work off the ignition circuit. I pushed the car forward. Okay, I was just moving it across, so I had my back to the back of the car and I was pushing it forward in my workshop just to work on it as it is here. At which point I got the weirdest smell of burning. It was like a toxic, plasticky, nasty smell of burning, and I thought, good grief, what are the burning outside? It stinks. Now, there isn't really much near me. There is a power station or two, and I thought, oh dear, that smell is vile. It turns out that as I pushed it forward, this had moved onto the column and caused a direct short, and the car was on fire. Okay, so the inside of this car, no flames were there, but it was full of this plastic stinking smoke. That's why the roof is unclipped. So I could take the roof down and let the smell go away, which it has. Okay, however, it was a very, very, very easy fix, thankfully. I had a spare loom, I had a spare switch, and I changed all that and I screwed this on securely. So things like that, just make sure there isn't something like that, like a dead short somewhere in the system that's going to cause you problems. If something isn't working, check why, okay? Don't assume it's just a fuse. If you change a fuse and it blows again, there is a short circuit somewhere. Check it out, okay? If you've had a mouse in there, my sympathies go out to you. It is, of course, always fixable. If they've melted a wire, if you melt a wire in your loom, it will potentially take the whole loom with it, because as it melts the plastic around that wire, it'll move on to something else. So please be careful. Very rare occurrence, but it's possible, so please check. I think this is number 4. It could be number 5. Either way, bear with me. Right, next one, petrol. Okay, the fuel pump in a Stag is in here. Okay, the fuel pump on the Mini is usually on the back of the engine, or the side of the engine. However, on this one, it has an electric pump here. Okay, now then, like all things, classic cars also get condensation in metal fuel tanks. Okay, it causes rust, it causes detritus, it causes real serious damage. Oops, got that bung out. Look. It also ruins fuel pumps, especially electric fuel pumps. It gets in there and kills them in literally seconds. So if your fuel pump dies after a stop, that is probably why. You're going to have to drain that tank, clean it all out, sluice it out with some fresh fuel. I generally use a tiny bit of diesel, actually, just to rinse out any moisture. But usually it's a fuel tank out job. So, fuel. If you've left fuel in your tank, now we also all know about the modern E10. It causes lots and lots of issues because there's a lot of water in the ethanol. It's a water-based fuel. So you need to be aware of that and be checking things like your rubber hoses, okay? Check these rubber hoses haven't split or perished. I used to have braided hoses on my car. I thought they were absolutely beautiful, and I had this overbraided fuel pipe. It absolutely looked the bobbins. However, the fuel pipe inside it split. When I started the engine, it sprayed fuel 6 feet in the air because of the fuel pressure, sorry. These are the things you need to check. But of course, if you've got braided hoses, you can't always see it. Check that this hasn't split, perished, gone hard, okay? Check your metal lines. If your metal lines are looking rusty or anything like that, get them changed out for copper or conifer. It's fine to use copper on fuel pipes. I don't know why, I just know it is. Okay, make sure your fuel pipe, if you're not sure about it, get it changed this year, okay? The E10 will eat it, and it'll either cause you a massive accident and a fire, or it'll cause you an issue right down the line, okay? The best case scenario is the car stops. The worst case scenario is it bursts onto the hot exhaust, and you lose your car and potentially your life. Obviously, we don't want that. If your fuel pump has stopped, if it's an SU pump like in the Stag, give her a tap. It'll usually kick it into life if it doesn't fire up straight away. Okay? Mechanical pumps, no problem, but let them turn over a little bit and let them fill that fuel back up in the carburetor. Next one, number 5 or 6, God knows where we are now. Excuse me. Wipers and washers, okay? Check that your wipers are still in one piece. The wipers on classic cars are mediocre at best. They are usually absolutely ridiculously poor, okay? They're either not large enough or they just don't work very well anyway, and they're slow and sluggish and they don't clear the screen very well. Make sure your wipers haven't gone hard. Also, make sure they haven't stuck to your windscreen, and the first time you need them when you take your car out, it just rips the wiper off and they don't work anymore. Secondly, washers, okay? If you've been using any form of screen wash, it tends to congeal if you've left the tank empty, especially just around where the pickup is for the washer pump. Now, if you've got a mechanical pump, chances are you'll be able to drag that through. If you've got an electric pump, chances are it'll block the pump up. Easily fixed, but better to do it now before you set off to that show or at the side of the road, because especially if you're in the UK, it's going to rain, okay? Car shows, bank holidays, rain. Coolant. Check your coolant levels. That's it. Just check it's got some in. Check it's got antifreeze in. Check that you've managed to put some in. But check that you haven't left it empty. That's pretty much it for coolant. You're usually all right. If you've left just water in there, get it sluiced out, get some antifreeze in. Do it now. Do it before the show season starts. On a note to coolant, thermostats. Now then, thermostats have changed over the years. Thermostats used to be great. Your thermostat would live on and on and on in your car, and there'd never be an issue, and it'd maintain its temperature, kinda. I'll take you over to the Stag, because when you talk about temperature, you've got to show a Stag engine. And it'd just work, it'd open, it'd close, and eventually it might stick a little bit or get a bit lazy, and the car might start to overheat, and you'd take it out and put a new one in. I've found in the last few years that I need to change my thermostat about every year and a half, and that's on a car that doesn't see a lot of use. Here's a trick. If you're not sure or you're worried about your thermostat, drill a couple of tiny little holes around the edge of it. And then even if the worst happens, it'll still flow a tiny bit of water. Check it's working. Let the car warm up. Make sure the fan is working. Make sure it's going to cool down. Okay? You do not want to set off to that car show 20 miles away and get about 3 and melt your engine because it's got too hot. Okay? So please, 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 please check. Check the thermostat is opening. If it isn't, take it out or put another one in. It's better to have one in, obviously, but you're better not to have it stuck, especially on something like this that's susceptible to damage from heat and also very expensive to rebuild. Next, 6, I think, might be 7, exhaust system, okay? There's the top of my stainless steel exhaust. Now then, you're sat there thinking, I'll listen to this bit, but I'm fine. I've got a stainless steel exhaust. However, the downside of stainless steel exhaust is the stainless they use for it that has a little tiny little bit of bend in it and stuff, so it isn't too brittle, although it is more brittle than mild steel. I'll come on to that in a sec. It does tend to still try to rust a little bit. Now, I built a full exhaust system when I had a Fiesta ST for a little while when I worked at Yorkshire Triumphs. I loved that car. I bought a load of 2.5-inch stainless steel pipe from eBay. Good stuff, not the cheap stuff, it was the expensive stuff. Welded it all together and it rusted like there was no tomorrow. Within 12 months, it looked absolutely like mild steel. It was awful. And I guarantee it was stainless steel. I think it was £80 for 2 meters, something like that. Make sure it hasn't rusted away, okay? Also, if it's stainless steel especially, make sure it hasn't cracked or split. It doesn't have the flexibility that mild steel has. It will crack and split. Now, if you've mounted it too solid, and I do see some exhausts really solid, they may crack and split. And you say, well, yeah, that's annoying. I'll get on to that. If it splits and cracks and those exhaust fumes get into your car while you're driving, okay, it may not kill you at the time, but it may make you unconscious. And unconscious and driving end very, very, very badly for everybody within a 25-mile radius, okay? Please, please, please make sure your exhaust system is in good condition. Also, what you'll find, if you've put nice new modern rubbers, and I get this a lot for the Stags, you get these modern rubbers. Modern rubber hasn't got the same rubberness. That sounds ridiculous, but it's not the same as the old-fashioned rubber they used to use. It isn't real rubber, it's like a synthetic rubber, and if anybody's seen them, you'll know what I mean. So the rubber hangers have a propensity to split and crack and fall to pieces. Generally, when you try to fit them, they are awful. Once built a Triumph Stag, when I worked at Yorkshire Triumphs, we bought all brand new rubbers for a brand new stainless steel exhaust system, put them on there. We put them on there, left it about a week, and they all split and fell off at the back. So we went out and found some good used rubbers, okay? Cleaned them up, fitted them to the exhaust. The owner complained and said, well, you know, you've charged me for this exhaust and rubbers, and these are just blooming old things. Look at the state of them. They were fine. They were actually better than the new ones. New exhaust rubbers, although they look flashy and shiny, when you put them on, they split and crack and break off. So have a quick scoot round, do it with a torch, do it with your phone, do it with it, whatever really. But if they're going to break, worst case scenario is your exhaust is going to split and crack and kill you. Second worst is it's going to fall off during the visit, or vibrate on the floor, or drive you insane in some way, shape or form. Now, exhaust systems are quite expensive, usually, for most cars. They're not cheap. So for the price of a few exhaust rubbers, or just to repair them before the break, then that could potentially save not only your life, but a lot of money. I mean, that's a very, very worst case scenario. I don't think anybody's going to kill themselves from it. But the fact is, it could save you a lot of money, because if it splits and cracks and breaks, getting it repaired won't be cheap, and getting it replaced won't be cheap either. So check your exhaust rubbers, check the condition of your exhaust system. If you're wondering if there's any cracks, or if you can tell if there's any cracks, look around the welds, because that's the weakest area. It leaves a divot around there when it's been electrically welded. You can't see it, but it's there, and you say, "Oh, well, can't you run another weld around it?" Well, you run a weld around that divot, and you create one further down the pipe, so it doesn't. You can't stop it. That's inevitable. Have a look there. The telltale signs is a little black trace of soot. If you've got that, there's an issue. It might just be a loose exhaust clamp, might just need nipping up, but it's worth getting it before you set off. Next one, number 8. Okay, contentious subject, I appreciate. Here in the UK, we need an MOT for cars that are under, I believe it's 40 years old now. You don't have to tax them, you don't have to MOT them, you just have to insure them and make sure they're legal. And then you go online to tax it, to make sure you've officially taxed it, even though you don't have to tax it, and blah, 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 blah. It's an expense, and it's a bit of an annoyance. However, what I do is I always recommend people get an MOT. If you choose not to, that's your choice. I'm not going to fall out with you, but the fact is, it's worth having somebody cast their eyes over your car. If you have got your car all to a point where you think it's perfect, just let them look at it, okay? Take it to a garage like me and spend an hour's money just for somebody to look over it. Although an MOT is better. They will check your brakes are working correctly. They will check your car is safe to drive. And I do it for my car. I have to do it for my car, okay? Because it's heavily modified and the engine in it is significantly more powerful than the engine that was in it originally. So legally or unlegally, I still have to MOT it. Okay, I do legally have to MOT it. If it makes 15% more power in the UK, you have to legally MOT it. But I do anyway, okay? So I would anyway. I mean, technically, I could get away with not doing it, and unless I got stopped, nobody would ever know it's got a, whatever, 400, 500, 600 horsepower engine in there. But I think just to be, A, safe so you don't get your car taken off you, B, safe on the roads, which is a big thing, you know, I just think it's well worth doing. I've always said it, and I think I'll stand by it. Whip it through the MOT. I know it's a pain. I know you have to book it in. I know it's expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than damaging yourself or anyone else, okay? And certainly your car, I'll say. Right, I think we're on 8 or 9. I'm going to say 9, because then I can do 10 things on my list. It might be 8, but if it is, I'm sorry. Sorry, grab the microphone so if it went crackly. 8 or 9, wherever we are. I'm still here. 8 or 9, wherever we are. Rust, okay? Rust is a good thing to worry about, okay? Your car's been stood up. It may have had a little bit of damp on it. Have a little bit of a look. So, you know, there's a rust spot here on that. I know there's quite a lot of filler in there. However, you could think, well, yeah, I want to get my car sprayed. I'm going to spray it this year. It might be next year. It might be year after. I might never do it, but I'll just leave it for now. Right. Don't leave these rust splodges like that, because that will turn into this, okay? Eventually, that's going to spread down there. Now, this is a big chip, and that is inevitably over a rust hole. However, to stop it getting worse, best case scenario, worst case scenario, if you like, or the easiest scenario, just to stop that getting worse, is a tiny smear of something like a little bit of transmission oil or engine oil, just on that, just to stop it getting any worse for now. Yes, it's going to be a pain when you paint it, but no, it's not going to repair it. It certainly isn't going to get rid of the rust. But the fact is, it will sort of slow down it getting any worse. Treat it a little bit, okay? Things like crust, things like a little bit of etch primer in there. You know, rub that off, get rid of the rust, sand it down a little bit, touch it in. Touch it in with a tiny little bit of paint. You can get this paint. Don't try to spray it. Don't mask it off and try to spray it. It'll look a mess. Worst case scenario, spray a little bit of paint from an aerosol into a cap of an aerosol and then touch it in with a little paintbrush. Two major things there. One, it's going to put more paint on, a bigger thickness, which is going to protect it and make it blend in a little better. Two, the thickness is going to make it blend in a little better, and it's easier to apply, and you can build it on a little bit thicker. Okay, but just to make that look better and to stop it getting any worse potentially. So any little, just go around your car, just check any little bits, check around the edges of your wheel arches, you know, where things get chipped, touch a little tiny bit of paint on. If you can't face doing all that, just put a bit of paint over there anyway. It's still going to help. It's certainly not going to get any, you know, it's not going to fix it, but it's going to stop it getting any worse. And when you step back and look at your car, it'll look significantly better. Last one. I'm not recommending you fit a 4.6 fuel-injected turbocharged Rover V8 in your car. I am really. Autoglim, okay? I'm not recommending this. Autoglim do not sponsor this video, but what I do recommend you do is wash your car, dry it off thoroughly with a modern type cloth. They do like a chamois leather that's really good now. That isn't a chamois, but anyway. And then give it a good polish, okay? For a number of reasons. One, it helps protect your paint. Two, it makes it look absolutely beautiful. And three, and this is probably the most important one, you go over the bodywork of that vehicle with a fine-tooth comb, and what you will notice is, and you'll have all done this, and you might not have even realised, although you probably have if you're a classic car owner or purveyor, is that as you go over that, you will notice every scratch, dent, nick, crack, split, damage. I used to spray, I remember polishing my car when it was orange and thinking, oh my God, this car is an absolute wreck. Because I noticed every little imperfection in the bodywork. Now, some of them were nothing. Some of them were something, and that's helped me spot them, okay? And they all got fixed. They're all fixed now. That is a fact. So I recommend a really good polish. Now, I quite like to give my car 2 coats of polish. If you want to use a cutting compound, any of that stuff, that's all up to you. I'm not recommending that one way or the other. I have nothing against it, nothing for it. But give it a good polish. It'll help protect the paintwork. Okay. It'll help protect it from getting rust and things like that also. It also protects the paint, obviously UV in the sunshine. Yeah, not so much in the UK. But the UV in the sunshine, okay, that damages your paintwork as well. And the polish just helps create somewhat of a barrier, okay? Maybe it doesn't say it on the bottle, maybe it does, I don't know. But I will tell you now that even the most battered car in the world, after a good wash and polish, will still look a lot better. And when people come up to it at a show and look at it, if people have to look with the fingers and not with their eyes, it'll prevent big swirls, it'll prevent scratches from the skin, and it's just worth doing. Now, yeah, get a layer of polish over it. If there's a scratch, a nick, anything like that, A, it'll show it up so you can see it, and B, it'll smear a little bit of polish into it and stop it getting any worse rust-wise. Okay. Right, so that's the end of the video. That's the 10 things I do before I start. There will be other things. I'll have missed stuff. I'll have forgot stuff. I'm old and I do forget things these days. However, I'm good looking and I enjoy classic cars. So the fact is, don't just roll your car out. Come show season, give it a good wash and whip off to the car shows. Imminently, you could end up with an issue. All this guide is to try and stop you having massive, expensive issues or risk to your life. Okay, the risk to your life is less, so I appreciate that. But just take a bit of time before you set off. It could save you a lot of hassle in the long run. I quite often see things on posts on Facebook groups and things like that. Oh, I took my car out today. It's been running fine. Took it out to a car show and blah, blah, blah. And you think, do you know what? All you had to do was X, Y, Z, and that would have prevented that happening in the first place. Or it certainly would have prevented you setting off and having to leave your car in a field for 3 days before you could get it fixed. Just take a little bit of forethought. No, you won't get everything. Yes, potentially something else could go wrong. But the fact is, just cast an eye over it. Make sure you're heading in the right direction. Thanks for your time. If you haven't liked, subscribe, please do. Please feel free to watch all the other videos or some of the other videos. There's lots on there and there's a little bit of everything. There's some practical, there's some guides like this one. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Goodbye.